Stakeholders in the petroleum sector are intensifying calls for government to urgently increase the country's petroleum reserves to reduce the impact of potential global supply disruptions. Now, this follows rising tensions in the Middle East, a situation they say could lead to a sharp increase in fuel prices. Although the National Petroleum Authority says Ghana currently has about 5 weeks of petroleum cover, the Executive Secretary for the Chamber for Petroleum Consumers, Duncan Amwa, speaking here on ChannelOne TV's current affairs program, The Big Issue, described the stock level as inadequate. Sarah Apia reports.
Rising tensions involving Iran, Israel and the United States is already affecting global oil supply following the closure of the Straits of Hormuz, a major shipping route through which about 20% of the world's oil passes. The disruption has led to delays in oil shipments and rising insurance costs for tankers, further tightening supply on the global market. Analysts warn the situation could trigger a sharp increase in crude oil prices if tensions persist. For some countries like South Korea, petroleum reserves are projected to last up to 7 months. But the Chamber of Petroleum Consumers, COPEC, says Ghana's current stock level remains limited, renewing calls for the establishment of a reserve margin fund for bust to enable the country's stock more full.
I have advocated all along that we should get a reserve margin and give to bust. A reserve margin that is controlled by the ministry and the government. We pay all kinds of taxes, funny taxes on petroleum products, but nothing for strategic stock. It is worrying, Sammy. You see, a time like this exposes you to not only grave danger, but grave harm. I am not particularly enthused by the 5 weeks storage we have. It is abysmal. And I'll put this on record. I have followed the international media a lot since the outset of these hostilities. South Korea is doing 7 months import cover. That's how much they have. 3.5 months for the central government, 3.5 months for private capital, right? Other countries, Germany and the rest, although they are being squeezed now, some of them can give you about 12 months, 15 months, right? That if nothing comes in, they can still be able to sustain their net national demand. I mean, for those numbers.
But do we have the capacity to do the number of months these countries are doing?
Yes, we do.
Energy analyst Kwejon Safwa-Poku also expressed concern, noting that escalating tensions in the Middle East could lead to a scarcity of oil and further cause a surge in crude oil prices in the next pricing window on March 16.
So now prices were around maybe $59 per barrel. As at yesterday, it's gotten to $91 per barrel. So we are going to see a big jump in the Platt prices, the refined prices coming in the FOB in the coming window. That would basically come and hit the pockets of the average Ghanaian. So that, in terms of the war, would do affect prices, and from a $30 jump in the crude oil prices, is going to have a huge effect on the refined products. But we know that since the Strait of Hormuz, that controls 20% of the world crude oil coming out of the Gulf area, is closed. A lot of refineries are also not going to get constant supply of crude, so it means that there are going to be less refined products on the market. For me, they can only forecast within the next 5 weeks, as they've said, right? After 5 weeks, then what next? So then we need to now quickly start talking to maybe Dangote, who is our neighbor, to now look at how best we can look at fuel security within the Gulf, the West African region.
On calls for Ghana to refine more of its crude locally through the Tema Oil Refinery and Sentio Oil Refinery to reduce reliance on imports, Kojo Poku says inadequate funding remains a major challenge.
We've always had that conversation, and it comes up that people say that why don't we give our crude to our refineries to refine? Because we have crude, which is shipped out. The issue is not about whether we have or we don't have. The issue is the jete, the money. Because bear in mind, when we ship our crude,
the money to refine
there is a law that governs our crude oil shipment. The PFMA has certain structure, the Petroleum Holding Fund, and all the things that we do with our crude. The Ministry of Finance sits comfortably waiting every month, every quarter for the receivables from our crude oil, for all the other things that the law has earmarked that we use our crude for. If we decide now that for the sake of fuel security, we are going to use our internal crude, let's say it gets to that point where we feel that we can't source products from elsewhere, we are going to give our crude to Central and Tor to refine. What it means is that those accounts that receives the money from our crude oil will not get that money.
Meanwhile, security analyst Dr. Ishmael Norman says the military action by the United States and Israel against Iran is largely aimed at weakening Iran's control within the global oil supply chain. He warned that the situation, if prolonged, could impact global markets.
Trump saw that Iran's administration is a bit weak. So the whole thing started with the bombing of the nuclear facilities. That is just a ruse, that is just a cover to really try to demolish the ruling system, because the goal is not only about regime change, the goal is also about control of oil.
The rising tensions are not only threatening the country's fuel pricing sector, but also affecting its security interests abroad. The Ghana Armed Forces has confirmed that 2 Guinean soldiers were critically injured after missile strikes hit the country's battalion headquarters serving under the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon on March 6.